Your brain is exposed to thousands of pieces of information every day, conversations, videos, books, ideas, but something strange happens. Almost all of it disappears within hours, sometimes minutes, and yet certain experiences do the opposite. A skill sticks, a memory forms, a habit develops, and your brain physically rewires itself. So what decides which experiences permanently change your brain and which ones vanish almost instantly? The answer isn't intelligence, and it isn't motivation. The answer is biology. Learning is not just something that happens in your mind. It is something that happens in your brain. Every time you truly learn something, your brain physically changes. Connections between cells strengthen. Other connections weaken. Entire networks reorganize. Most people imagine learning as something abstract. You read information, you think about it, you remember it. But inside the brain, learning is mechanical. Signals move, cells fire, chemicals are released. Connections change. To understand the biology of learning, we need to begin with the smallest units involved. Neurons. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Each neuron is a specialized cell designed to send and receive information. But neurons do not work in isolation. They communicate through tiny junctions called synapses. When one neuron becomes active, it sends an electrical signal down a long extension called an axon. When that signal reaches the end of the axon, chemicals called neurotransmitters are released. Those chemicals travel across a microscopic gap and bind to receptors on another neuron. If the signal is strong enough, the next neuron activates, and the message continues through the network. When groups of neurons repeatedly activate together, they begin forming stable communication pathways. These pathways are called neural circuits, and neural circuits are the foundation of learning. When you encounter something new for the first time, the neural pathway responsible for that information is weak. Signals travel inefficiently. Connections are unstable. The brain is still figuring out how the information fits into its existing networks. But if that same pathway activates again and again, something begins to change. The connection between those neurons strengthens, more receptors appear, signals travel faster, communication improves. This process is called synaptic plasticity. Plasticity simply means the ability to change. Your brain is constantly adjusting its connections based on experience. Every time neurons activate together repeatedly, the relationship between them becomes stronger. There is a famous phrase in neuroscience that summarizes this process. Neurons that fire together wire together. It's a simple way of describing how repetition strengthens neural connections. But learning is not only about strengthening connections. The brain is also removing them. Connections that are rarely used gradually weaken. Eventually they disappear. This process is called synaptic pruning. Think of your brain like a road system. Routes that are used frequently become wider and faster. Routes that are rarely used slowly disappear. Your brain is constantly optimizing itself, strengthening useful pathways, removing inefficient ones. This means learning is not simply adding information. Learning is reorganizing the brain's network. New connections form. Old ones disappear. The entire system becomes more efficient. But there is another factor that determines whether learning actually occurs: attention. Your brain receives far more information than it can store, so it has to prioritize. Signals that receive focused attention are more likely to produce lasting change. When you pay attention to something, certain neurochemicals increase in the brain. These chemicals signal that the information is important. Without attention, signals are weak. And weak signals rarely produce structural changes in neural circuits. Emotion also plays a powerful role in learning. Emotionally significant experiences activate brain regions involved in survival. That activation strengthens memory formation. This is why emotionally intense moments often become vivid memories. The brain treats emotional events as important information. Another critical factor is repetition. One exposure rarely produces lasting learning. The brain needs repeated activation of a pathway to justify strengthening it. If a signal appears once, it may disappear quickly. But if it appears repeatedly, the brain begins stabilizing the connection. This is why practice matters so much. Practice is not just repetition. Practice is biological reinforcement. Every time you repeat a behavior or recall information, the neural circuit responsible for that activity becomes stronger. Over time, the pathway becomes efficient. Signals travel faster. Fewer neurons are needed to produce the same result, and the skill begins to feel easier. This biological process also explains why learning often feels frustrating at the beginning. When neural pathways are weak, signals struggle to move efficiently. Mistakes happen, confusion appears. Progress feels slow, but those difficulties are part of the process. They are signs that the brain is building new circuits. As repetition continues, those circuits strengthen, and what once felt difficult becomes automatic. Understanding the biology of learning changes how you think about intelligence. Many people believe learning ability is mostly determined by intelligence. But intelligence alone does not create neural pathways. Experience does. Focused attention, repeated engagement, effortful practice. This also explains why passive consumption often fails to produce lasting learning. Watching information activates neural circuits temporarily, but temporary activation is not the same as structural change. For a pathway to strengthen, the brain must generate the signal repeatedly, not just observe it. This is why activities like recall, problem solving, and practice tend to produce stronger learning than simply reviewing information, because those activities force the brain to activate the circuit itself. Once you understand the biology behind learning, the process becomes less mysterious. Learning is not magic, it is adaptation. Signals become circuits. Circuits become networks. Networks become skills. And perhaps the most important insight is this: your brain is not fixed. Even in adulthood, neural pathways continue changing. New connections form, old ones weaken. Your brain remains adaptable throughout your life. This ability is called neuroplasticity, and it is the foundation of learning. But this raises an interesting question. If learning strengthens neural pathways, why do some behaviors eventually run automatically? Why do certain actions stop requiring conscious effort? Because eventually, repeated learning becomes something else. It becomes habit. In the next video, we're going to explore how repeated learning transforms into automatic behavior, how the brain decides which patterns become habits, and why habits can be incredibly powerful once they form. Because understanding how the brain learns is only the first step. Understanding how it automates behavior is the next. Pause, I'll see you there.